Hello everyone, John A.G. here. Welcome back to my channel, AUREX. If you haven't yet, subscribe to my channel. In this channel, you will find the real information, real market updates that everyone cannot tell you. So please subscribe to this channel and love you all of my subscribers for your support. And please watch this video till the very end because YouTube will not push my videos to more people. And I will add many things related to this topic and make this speech fully professional, with an emotional human touch, and powerful. Take a very deep breath and look around you right now. Today is May 10th, 2026. Outside your window, the world might still look somewhat normal. The sun rises, people commute to whatever jobs they still manage to hold on to, and the superficial, comforting hum of daily life continues its rhythm. But do not let this quiet facade deceive you for a single second. Beneath the surface of this fragile, manufactured normalcy, the very tectonic plates of our global economy are tearing themselves apart with a violence we have not witnessed in generations. We are standing on the precipice of a financial abyss, looking down into a darkness that most Wall Street analysts, career politicians, and mainstream media outlets simply do not want to acknowledge. They want to keep you pacified. They want to keep you blindly buying the dip. They want to keep you believing that the global financial system is resilient enough to absorb what is currently unfolding in the Middle East. But here on AUREX, we do not deal in comforting fantasies. We deal in reality. We deal in the harsh, unfiltered, unvarnished truth. And the truth is this: the escalating, devastating war involving Iran, the United States, and Israel is not just a distant geopolitical tragedy playing out on your television screen. It is the definitive catalyst for the most devastating stock market crash and systemic economic unraveling of our lifetimes. The events that began in late February of this year have set into motion a catastrophic domino effect that cannot be undone by treaties, cannot be legislated away by panicked governments, and absolutely cannot be printed over by central banks. This is not a drill, and this is not a temporary market correction. This is the great unwinding of the globalized financial order. Today, I am going to take you deep inside the crisis, tear away the carefully constructed mainstream narratives, and show you exactly why the global stock market is living on borrowed time. More importantly, I am going to explain how this unprecedented event will directly impact your family, your livelihood, your savings, and your future. To truly understand the catastrophic financial earthquake that is about to level Wall Street and echo through every financial capital on Earth, we must first look at the epicenter. For years, the conflict between Iran, Israel, and the West was a shadow war. It was fought in the dark, out of the public eye. It was a war of cyber attacks, proxy skirmishes in neighboring territories, covert intelligence operations, and economic sanctions. The financial markets, in their arrogant and terminal complacency, priced this tension as a permanent, manageable background noise. Wall Street algorithms, designed by brilliant mathematicians who lack any understanding of human nature or military strategy, were programmed to ignore the Middle East. They assumed that cooler heads would always prevail, because the economic cost of a hot war would simply be too devastating for any nation to willingly endure. But I want you to ask yourself a critical question right now. What happens when the heart of global energy simply stops beating? That illusion of perpetual stability shattered permanently on February 28, 2026. When the coordinated military campaigns escalated beyond proxy forces and directly targeted foundational infrastructure, the calculus of the modern world changed overnight. We crossed a red line from which there is no easy return. The retaliation we witnessed was not limited to the exchange of ballistics. It was the deployment of the ultimate world-stopping economic weapon: the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. You see, modern wars are no longer fought just with bullets, drones, and bombs. They are fought with supply chains. They are fought with access to the raw materials that allow modern civilization to exist. By pulling the geographic lever on the Persian Gulf, this conflict instantly, violently morphed from a regional military dispute into a global economic hostage situation. Let us talk about the Strait of Hormuz in detail, because this narrow, seemingly insignificant body of water is the exact reason your retirement portfolio is about to bleed out. At its narrowest point, this strait is just 21 miles wide. It is a tiny sliver of the ocean, yet through this geographic choke point passes the absolute lifeblood of human civilization. Before this conflict escalated, roughly 20 million barrels of oil traversed those dangerous waters every single day. That is 20% of the world's entire seaborne petroleum supply. But the nightmare does not stop at crude oil. 20% of the global supply of liquefied natural gas, the very fuel that keeps the winter heating running in Europe and powers the massive industrial manufacturing base of Asia, must also pass through this exact same choke point. Since early March, that flow has effectively, terrifyingly, dropped to zero. We are currently witnessing a total maritime paralysis. If you log on to satellite shipping trackers right now, you will see that the approaches to the strait are a floating ghost town. Massive, multi-million-dollar, very large crude carriers are anchored offshore, idling endlessly, trapped in a purgatory of geopolitical maneuvering. Shipping insurance premiums through Lloyd's of London have not just spiked, they have become mathematically prohibitive, rising by thousands of percent, effectively making it illegal and financially ruinous for any commercial vessel to enter the zone. The International Energy Agency has already started using language that should terrify any rational investor. They are quietly calling this the largest, most severe supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. I want those words to sink deep into your mind. The history of the global market. This is not a repeat of the 1973 OPEC oil embargo. This is vastly worse than the 1979 Iranian Revolution. We are currently missing nearly 1 billion barrels of oil from the global supply chain, and emergency strategic petroleum reserves across the Western Hemisphere are bleeding dry at a rate that mathematically cannot be sustained. We are watching the world's economic engine being deliberately, methodically starved of oxygen. But if you think this is just about paying more at the gas station, you are missing the most dangerous part of this equation. How does a geopolitical choke point thousands of miles away translate to a collapsing S&P 500 or a decimated NASDAQ? It comes down to the ruthless, unforgiving, cold mathematics of inflation. In the weeks following the maritime blockade, Brent crude oil exploded past $120 a barrel, and predictive models from elite institutions are now warning that a prolonged stalemate will permanently floor the price above $150. Here is the secret that Wall Street does not want you to understand. Petroleum is the invisible, foundational ingredient in absolutely everything around you. It is the diesel that powers the massive logistical networks, the trains and the 18-wheelers delivering food to your local grocery store. It is the jet fuel that facilitates the entirety of global physical commerce. Even more critically, it is the baseline chemical ingredient for the fertilizers that grow the crops that feed 8 billion people on this planet. The Persian Gulf region alone accounts for over 30% of global urea exports and nearly a third of all traded agricultural fertilizers. When energy prices double, the cost of moving goods doubles, the cost of manufacturing doubles, and the cost of human survival doubles. We are already seeing the European Central Bank and the Federal Reserve panicking behind closed doors. They are terrified because they are staring down the barrel of hyper-stagflation. This is the most toxic, economy-destroying phenomenon known to modern finance. It is a scenario where economic growth completely dies, unemployment skyrockets, yet the prices of everyday goods continue to surge uncontrollably. Central banks are utterly powerless against this specific type of crisis. If inflation is caused by a booming economy and people having too much money, a central bank can simply raise interest rates to cool down demand. But you cannot print barrels of oil out of thin air. You cannot use monetary policy to lower the cost of a shipping container navigating a war zone. You cannot change the geographic reality of a military blockade with a spreadsheet in Washington. The supply shock is absolute and it is physical. This means that the era of cheap capital, the very foundation of 0% interest rates that falsely propped up the stock market for the last 15 years, is officially, permanently dead. You might be looking at your screen right now, looking at the major indices and thinking to yourself, John, the market has taken a hit. We've seen some red days, but it hasn't completely crashed yet. Are you exaggerating the timeline? If you are thinking this, you need to listen very closely to what comes next. The stock market is a delayed reaction machine. It is a beast that feeds on forward projections, and right now, it is utterly blind to the physical reality of the global supply chain. What we have seen so far in the markets is merely the tremor before the catastrophic tsunami. Currently, the market is suffering from what economists call a rate shock. Bond yields have spiked because institutional investors are finally realizing that inflation is going to stay violently higher for much longer. But what is coming next? The tidal wave that the algorithmic trading bots and high-frequency algorithms are just beginning to calculate in their black box servers is the massive, unavoidable growth shock. When global corporations are forced to report their earnings for the second and third quarters of 2026, the financial bloodbath will be biblical. Profit margins, which have been artificially inflated for a decade, are going to be compressed into fine dust. Corporations will have to pay double for transportation, double for basic manufacturing, and double for the raw materials required to make their products. But they will not be able to pass all of those surging costs onto the consumer. Why? Because the global consumer is already fundamentally broken. The average family is entirely tapped out, drowning in credit card debt, and struggling just to keep the lights on and put protein on the dinner table. The average investment portfolio today, according to internal data from the largest asset managers, is dangerously, recklessly overweight in speculative tech stocks, hyper-valued software companies, and consumer discretionary brands. At the same time, these portfolios are woefully, entirely lacking in the hard assets required to protect wealth against severe structural inflation. We have built a global financial system that is perfectly optimized for a peaceful, hyper-globalized world where energy is cheap, shipping lanes are open, and interest rates are essentially zero. That world no longer exists. It died in the Persian Gulf this year. When the brutal realization finally hits Wall Street that this conflict is not a short-term blip that can be resolved with a quick diplomatic handshake, but rather a permanent structural paradigm shift in global energy access, the algorithmic sell-offs will trigger with a ferocity we have never seen. Stop losses will cascade across millions of accounts simultaneously. We will see trading days where the Dow Jones drops thousands of points in a matter of hours, triggering circuit breakers that fail to halt the panic. The volatility index, the VIX, will rip upward, tearing through historical resistance levels as sheer, unadulterated panic sets in. The buy the dip mentality that conditioned an entire generation of retail investors to throw their savings blindly into the market will become a financial death sentence. But behind every plunging chart, behind every violently fluctuating red percentage on your digital screen, there is a profound, deeply human tragedy unfolding in real time. On AUREX, we refuse to just look at the money. We demand to look at the people. I want you to close your eyes and think about the working-class father in the industrial heartland, pulling his aging vehicle up to the fuel pump, staring blankly at the numbers spinning faster than his stagnant wages could ever possibly keep up with. He realizes with a sickening, heavy drop in his stomach that it now costs him an entire day's pay just to fuel the vehicle he absolutely needs to get to his job. Think about the elderly pensioner in Europe, holding a winter heating bill that is suddenly, inexplicably larger than her entire monthly fixed income. She is being forced, in the twilight of her life, to make the impossible, deeply inhumane choice between heating her small home so she doesn't freeze, or buying the medication that keeps her alive. Think about the millions of hardworking people who have spent 30, 40, or 50 years working, saving every penny and sacrificing their present comfort for a future promise. They poured their life energy, their sweat, and their tears into 401ks and pension funds that are heavily, blindly weighted in the very equities that are about to be decimated. They are sitting in their living rooms right now, watching the security of their twilight years evaporate into the ether of a geopolitical conflict they had absolutely no part in starting and no power to stop. This is the true, hidden cost of the crisis. Analysts on television will talk about markets in terms of trillions of dollars moving from one column to another, but the real, visceral currency of a market crash is human despair. It is the sleepless nights staring at the ceiling. It is the delayed dreams of sending a child to college. It is the overwhelming, crushing stress that tears loving marriages apart, and the deep, silent anxiety that strips proud, hard-working people of their basic dignity. The mainstream media will treat this entire catastrophe as a political football. They will sit in comfortable studios and debate the military tactics, the missile ranges, and the political polling. But they will completely ignore the silent, agonizing suffering of the global middle class, who are being mercilessly offered up as the sacrificial lambs on the grand altar of geopolitical supremacy. We must also understand with crystal clarity that this economic crash is not just a financial event. It is the violent birth pang of an entirely new world order. The 2026 conflict has proven, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that the unipolar world, the era where a single Western superpower could unilaterally dictate the terms of global security, global trade, and global economics, is permanently over. National security in the 21st century is no longer just about who possesses the most aircraft carriers, the most stealth bombers, or the largest standing army. True security is about supply chains. It is about sovereign energy resilience. It is about the ability to feed your own people and power your own factories when the world shuts down. As the Middle East burns and the shipping lanes remain choked, countries like China, Russia, and the broader BRICS coalition are watching carefully, calculating every move. They are rapidly restructuring their historic alliances, hoarding physical commodities, and aggressively accelerating their move away from the Western financial system. The long-held reliance on the United States dollar as the ultimate unquestionable safe haven and the sole mechanism for global trade is being actively dismantled. Bilateral energy deals are being struck entirely outside of the SWIFT banking system, bypassing Western sanctions and creating a parallel, commodity-backed financial architecture. The Gulf states themselves, once considered the permanently safe, glittering oases of global capital, infinite tourism, and architectural marvels, are waking up to their immense geographic vulnerability. Billions of dollars in foreign direct investment are fleeing the region. The narrative of the Middle East as a stable, forward-looking investment destination has been shattered, perhaps for a generation. We are actively, painfully transitioning from an interconnected, hyper-efficient global village into a fragmented, suspicious, multipolar fortress world. And you need to understand the economics of a fortress world. In a fortress world, international trust is zero. Protectionist tariffs are historically high. Supply chains are intentionally redundant and highly localized, and therefore absolutely everything costs vastly more. I know that what I am telling you today is terrifying. I know the weight of this information is incredibly heavy to carry. It is uncomfortable, it is dark, and it goes against everything the financial entertainment complex wants you to believe. But my absolute responsibility as your guide, as the voice of AUREX, is not to comfort you with sweet, dangerous lies. My duty is to arm you with the brutal truth so you have the time, the knowledge, and the power to protect yourself, your wealth, and your family. In every historical crisis, from the Great Depression to the stagflation of the 1970s to the crash of 2008, wealth does not simply evaporate into thin air. Money does not disappear in a stock market crash. It simply moves. It transfers violently from the uninformed to the hyper-prepared. It transfers from the panicked, emotional masses to the patient, educated minority. So, how do we survive the great unraveling of 2026? What is the exact blueprint to protect your blood, sweat, and tears? First, you must immediately and ruthlessly rethink the traditional 60-40 portfolio. The outdated financial advice of holding 60% stocks and 40% government bonds is failing spectacularly in real time. Bonds are supposed to be your safety net, meant to protect you when equities fall. But in a supply shock, highly inflationary environment, bonds become a guaranteed mechanism for losing purchasing power because the raging inflation completely eats away the fixed, meager yield. You are locking in a guaranteed loss of wealth. You must aggressively pivot toward inflation-protected assets and entirely new strategies. Second, you desperately need exposure to physical, hard assets. When fiat paper money loses its purchasing power by the week, and traditional paper equities are crashing due to compressed margins, institutional capital always flees to the physical and the finite. Gold, silver, essential industrial commodities, and select, highly decentralized cryptocurrencies that operate entirely outside the control of the traditional banking system become your financial lifeboats. You need to own assets that cannot be printed on a whim by a panicked central bank, assets that cannot be sanctioned by a desperate government, and assets that have zero counterparty risk. Third, if you must remain invested in the stock market, you must adopt an incredibly defensive posture. You can no longer afford to hold speculative, cash-burning growth companies that promise profits a decade from now. You need financial fortresses. You need to own pieces of companies that produce the absolute necessities that human beings cannot live without, regardless of how high the price goes. You must look for energy producers operating strictly outside of the Middle East conflict zones. You must look at critical utility companies, essential healthcare providers, and the absolute bare-bones consumer staples that people will buy even if they have to max out their credit cards to do it. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, you must preserve your liquid capital strategically. Yes, holding cash in a high inflation environment is like holding a melting ice cube, but having a strategic, significant reserve of dry powder allows you to do something incredible. It allows you to become the predator rather than the prey. It allows you to buy the absolute generational dip when the blood is truly running in the streets and widespread panic has pushed the valuations of incredible companies down to pennies on the dollar. You must mentally and financially position yourself not just to survive the initial shockwave of this crash, but to aggressively capitalize on the massive recovery that will inevitably follow, even if it is years down the line. The months ahead are going to test the absolute limits of our psychological endurance. We are going to see headlines that are specifically engineered to induce blind panic. We are going to watch politicians pointing fingers at one another on television, desperate to shift the blame, and we will watch central bankers sitting behind grand podiums making endless, complicated excuses for why their models failed. But you have a distinct, powerful advantage. You are here. You are awake to the reality of the situation. You see the geopolitical and macroeconomic chessboard exactly for what it is, not what you wish it to be. I started this channel, AUREX, because I was exhausted and deeply angered by seeing everyday, hardworking people continually led to the financial slaughterhouse by institutional media and Wall Street insiders. I wanted to build an unbreakable community of sovereign, fiercely intelligent individuals who are brave enough to face economic reality head-on. The 2026 conflict is a profound human tragedy, both in the terrible loss of life we are witnessing in the Middle East and in the silent economic destruction cascading across the globe, destroying the livelihoods of millions. But you do not have to be a helpless victim of this financial fallout. You have agency. You have choices. Prepare your portfolios with ruthless logic, protect your families with everything you have, and steel your minds against the emotional manipulation that is coming. We are navigating the most treacherous, uncharted economic waters in modern history, but we are doing it together, side by side. Please, if this message resonated with you, if this video brought you real, tangible value, hit the like button right now. Share this video immediately with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and anyone in your life who desperately needs to wake up and see the storm that is already making landfall. Subscribe to AUREX because as this unprecedented global situation develops day by day, hour by hour, I will be right here on the front lines. I will be analyzing the raw data, cutting through the endless mainstream noise, and delivering the real, unfiltered market updates that everyone else is simply too afraid to tell you. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your continued trust in this channel. Stay incredibly strong, stay meticulously prepared, and I will see you in the next video.